Why isn't there a universal language of communication between species and between things living and non-living? And should there be one?
That's a lovely question, and it's fun to think about. Obviously, there's not even a universal human language. So,
Yeah.
language is a very advanced, uh, in terms of biology, it's a very advanced capability. It's one of the essential things about being human. All known human societies have language, even though anthropologists are always looking for exceptions. They've never found a human society that doesn't have language. In contrast, no animals have language. They communicate a bit with squawks and barks and things like that, but nothing that a linguist would call that's a genuine language. So
Right.
it's difficult to correct them, to create a language. It took a long time to have the brain power able to do it. And we also see that language does not get embedded in the brain. There's something about the way language works as a vocal representation of meaningful thought that cannot be encoded into the brain. It'd be nicer if we were all born knowing the same language, all humans knowing the same language.
Welcome to the Mixed Emotions podcast. This is your host, Mihir Oak. Professor, thank you so much for taking out this time to come on the podcast. This podcast is around human behavior. It is about context dependent discussions. It is about life not being black and white. Hence, a lot to do with context, lots to do with the environment, questioning reality in terms of what is really going on behind the seen and the unseen, and how it is that we don't really understand what is happening, and judgments come through that process of not understanding and still sitting with what is seen and what is not seen. You have more than 700 scientific publications to your name, and you have more than 250,000 academic citations to your name as well, which makes you one of the most influential social psychologists of our time. And that's truly that's something else. The core of or deriving meaning in life is a core principle of the human mind, and in life in general it starts from kids asking why questions about or in the essence to better understand life as we know it, to grown-ups deriving purpose through meaning of work, hobbies, passions, and everything in between. So, taking that into context, how do you think it is that we derive meaning of life? And where does self awareness come into all of this?
All right. First, regarding meaning of life, I wrote a book on this some years ago, and I just tried to learn everything I could about the area. It seems there are several basic things that people look for. So the questions are more consistent than the answers. Different people can find different ways to answer them. So, one first is purpose. Indeed, the original psychologist to deal with life's meaning was Viktor Frankl. And for him, that's essentially what it was. It was purpose. So people can find different purposes, whether it's supporting their family or doing artistic work or scientific work, serving their country, helping the poor, many different ways to find purpose. But something has to be a purpose, which means your present activities draw meaning from something in the future that you're working toward. And there's a continuous movement toward some purpose. A second one that I added was value. There has to be positive value. People want a basis for knowing right and wrong, and especially for thinking and making choices in their own lives so they can do something that is positive and good. And not all purposes are equally good, of course. People want to feel and think that they are working towards some purpose that has positive value. A third that struck me is efficacy, that it's not enough just to have goals and to have positive values, but to feel that you can make a difference, that you can actually move toward those goals, that you can help to realize them in some way, or at least make progress toward them. And the fourth, I thought people generally want a positive view of themselves. They want some basis for self-worth, for thinking that they're a positive value person. Often in practice, it means a reason for thinking that they're better than other people. which many people seem to look for reasons like that. Since my original work, some other thinkers have added coherence, something we want from a meaning of life, that it has to fit all together in some way and make sense. The definitions of coherence are perhaps not as clear as some of the others, but I do think it's an important and correct idea that it somehow has to all fit together and make sense. So again, people can find these meanings in different places, in family and religion, and in work and in artistic endeavor and sports or helping future generations, politics. The important thing is to have some answer for each of those.
But where does self-awareness play a role in individual meaning of life? Because my meaning of life could be different from yours. And the idea would be that I should be able to know myself to the extent of knowing what my capability is to then pursue something that is in my control or in my ability to achieve what I set out to be.
Yes, good point. So, self awareness is not originally or fundamentally about finding meaning in life. It's probably more basic in terms of seeing yourself how others see you and learning how to fit into the group and learning how to change yourself so you can fit into the group and conform to its rules and so on. But that said, it's certainly helpful toward meaning, especially in the ways you said. You need to know your capabilities, your strengths and weaknesses. So you look for a purpose in life that you're capable of doing something about and that you're good at, so that you don't choose, say, some
Right.
goals that would not suit you. So that's more of putting it into practice, I'd say,
Right.
rather than the meaning itself. Mentioned religion.
Yeah.
Here in the West, religion is slowly retreating and declining, but many people still find it a very powerful source of meaning in life, and it sets rules that you have to evaluate yourself by. So that takes self-awareness. Am I being consistent with the guidelines of my religion? Some people have suggested religious people are often better people, better behaved, and so on. But particularly people who believe in a God who is always watching them, that enforces self awareness and makes you aware when you are doing something bad
Right.
that would displease God. So, again, in practice, self awareness can help you implement your meanings of life, choose goals that will be suitable for you, and so on. But it's probably not what originally self awareness was for.
What was it for?
The main thing, going back to a couple of psychologists, Carver and Shire, in the 1980s, it probably emerged to regulate yourself. Because people aren't just aware of themselves the way they might see a tree over there and say, oh, that's a tree. There's myself. Oh, but you're always comparing yourself to, am I doing the things I'm supposed to? You know, people look in a mirror for self awareness. They're checking, do I look okay? Is my hair combed? Are my clothes proper? Would I make a good impression? And you set goals for yourself and you compare yourself to, are you living by them? Are you moving
So,
toward the goals and so on? So that's self-awareness in a much more fundamental way to really to help us. We evolved essentially to live in these groups, in these advanced kind of social groups that have culture, which means they have complex rules and systems and sets of interlocking roles so that people can work together and complement each other. So you need self-awareness to understand what's your place in society and what do you need to do to perform that effectively.
so you're saying that self-awareness is a feature of group mentality. It is not, it would not exist if we were not social beings.
I expect that is true. Certainly, all humans are social beings, and no other animals have self awareness to anywhere near the extent that human beings do. And the only ones that even the slightest signs of self awareness I find are other highly social animals, like some of the other great apes. So it does seem to be intimately tied in to being a social being. if you're a solitary creature and were not a social animal at all, you'd be aware of, say, a pain in your foot. But that's not really the same as being self-aware. The way people reflect on themselves and why did I do something and what is the impression I'm trying to create on others.
How would you resonate with Maslow's hierarchy of needs with your theories of self awareness, self preservation, efficacy, values that we have? How much would you agree with them?
Well, I think Maslow, so he said there's a hierarchy that I guess
Yeah,
people start with the most basic needs for safety and food and so on. And when those are satisfied, they move on to, I think, belongingness and love were second and so forth. He's correct in that people have these different kinds of motivations. Research has not really supported the idea that they go in sequence like that. It makes sense that the most fundamental needs are for food and safety and your basic animal survival. But sometimes people will risk those for more advanced ones, for the esteem of others, for belonging to the group, even for self actualization. Self actualization, he said, is the highest one that
yeah,
comes after the others. But one of the earliest objections is what about artists who are poor but are devoting themselves to their art because they think that's the most important thing rather than taking care of their more basic animal needs? And that's, I think, a fair critique. Um, as I understand it, that's about where things stand. Some people have
right,
recently revisited Maslow's ideas and just sought to update them, and I don't have them all clear in my mind right now. But
right,
the idea of a sequence or hierarchy, life is more complicated or at least more messy than that. But at least as a way of sorting the needs, and some are more basic, some are more advanced. The desire to be esteemed by others and have others respect you and look up to you, that is pretty deeply rooted in our species. You need self awareness for that already,
right,
because you need to understand how other people are seeing you. You need to understand the values and see for yourself, are you living up to them? And are other people noticing and respecting that as well, which is more
right.
fundamental. It's hard to say for me. I think the interpersonal things tend to be more fundamental because that's the essence of the way our species works.
Right, right, right. In your book, that is Willpower, you have mentioned that ego is very much, and willpower is very much a finite resource, and it has got a lot of relations with glucose and blood levels, or glucose levels in the blood. And as like physically as they deplete, you will have lesser willpower in your body to be able to achieve things. To that essence, what do you think is ego, and what do you mean by ego depletion?
Ego was Freud's term for the self. Back in the
Yes.
90s, when we started doing experiments to test the idea that willpower could get exhausted, that you could use it up. And this was just an impression that I got from reading all the research literature at the time. It seemed that as people performed a series of self control acts, they seemed to get weaker at them, and there seemed to be some deterioration in performance. So it looked like some kind of energy was being depleted. So back then in the 90s, that was the computer revolution had just swept through the United States, and that was all. Psychologists were excited about thinking of the mind as a little computer. So all the theories going around were about information processing and how people
Yes.
react to this or that information and store it and so on. So the idea that the self consisted partly of energy, this was a really foreign idea at the time. But we did find it across many studies, and now there are hundreds of other studies published by other people that have found the same effects. So I thought the self, it certainly contains thoughts and information and all that, and information about the self, but it also seems to consist of this energy. And I wanted to use a term to describe this effect that sometimes it could get used up, So we looked through the history of theories about the self, and there are lots of theories about the self, of course, but hardly any of them had talked in terms of energy. The last one we could find was Sigmund Freud, and he had said the self exists partly of energy, and we didn't mean to embrace the rest of his theory, which was brilliant at the time. It was 100 years ago. So we've made some advances since then. But just to give him credit for at least saying, yes, energy is part of the self. We borrowed his term, hence we called it ego depletion, as in using up some of the energy. We didn't come around to using the term willpower for a while later. Psychologists are always a little hesitant about using popular language terms because they have all these connotations and so on. But eventually I was satisfied that no, this is what willpower, this is what people mean by willpower, and there's a scientific reality behind it, given that, as I said, in
Right.
countless experiments, if you use up some of your willpower in the first part of the experiment, then you don't have as much to succeed in the later part of the experiment.
Right. With context, you may be a different human being at home versus different in a group, which is like a social group, a group of friends, versus a different human being when you're in college or you're amongst your peers or you're at a work environment.
This is a common argument, but ultimately I think that's not true. You still are the same person. If you borrowed $100 from somebody at work and you see them when you're at home, you still owe them $100. They call you by the
Mathematically,
same
yes.
name. So some of your behaviors may change, but that just shows that the self is flexible and adapts to situations. It's one of the positive aspects of the self, not a reason for arguing that the self doesn't exist, which some people have used it to make that case, but I don't think they believe it themselves. There are several books out saying the self is an illusion, but I noticed the authors put their names on the cover and they tell a lot of stories about themselves. If they don't believe in themselves, why do they talk about themselves so much? So I think the self is quite flexible. It's something that can adopt a role and then move out of it into a different role. It can change roles temporarily or back and forth in the same day. Or
Right.
say you move to a different job and get a whole different role. But you still have the same history, the same birthday, the same family, a lot of the same attitudes and feelings. If you injured your foot when you were young, you still have that injury or the scar.
Right.
There's more continuity. Animals mostly live in the present, and long-term relationships they have some, but although not nearly like we do.
Yeah.
The human self is a process of forging, of creating unity across time. I mean, the earliest is even in the same time. I think one of the early steps toward the self is when the brain learns to move the body. I remember, for example, watching my little daughter learn to crawl the day she figured it out. And I realized it's complicated because you have to move your left hand and your right knee, plant them, and then move your right hand and your left knee. So the brain
Right.
has to understand hands and knees, has to understand left and right, has
Right.
to alternate moving them with the left knee and right hand and vice versa. So it's a fairly complicated system, but the brains get this pretty fast and learn to manage it. So that's a way of creating unity. It's organizing all the parts of the body to work together to move the body around. And I remember the look on her face thinking, oh, this is going to change everything. Now I can go places. Now I can go
Right.
where I want. And so that's creating unity at one point in the present. And again, simple animals have that. So
Right.
it's a very early version of self. In human society, we also forge unity across time. This is fundamental to morality. It's not enough just to tell people it's wrong to lie or cheat someone. You have to create the unity across time so that if you lie and cheat somebody now, you'll be responsible for it later and you'll have to pay a price and other people won't trust you in the future. And
Right.
because you're concerned about the future, you make sure to behave well now. That's how morality works. But again,
Yes.
it's based on the continuity across time. One of the books that really intrigued me was a book by Friedman, Brief History of Law in America. He made the profound point that laws and morals essentially prescribe the same kinds of behaviors. Don't lie to people, don't cheat, don't kill
Yes.
them. feel this stuff, and so on. And he said, why do we have both? In a traditional small farming village, a small community, everybody knew everybody. Morality really rests on the force of reputation. And so you do something bad now, that will haunt you for a long time because
Yes.
other people will hold it against you. But as we live in bigger and bigger cities, in a big city, you can interact with different people every day. You could lie to someone every day, and it will never get back to do it. They won't be able to meet up and compare notes. And so that's when laws have to come into place to enforce them, contracts. But the law also operates based on continuity over time. And you'd be prosecuted for something you did a year ago, in some cases, many years ago.
Yes.
And then your punishment can extend into the future. They put you in prison, or they take away your driver's license, or
Yeah. What
whatever it is.
what Jordan Peterson says is that a future society and the values that the governing laws of our society in today's generation is built on the future society that we envision ourselves to be in. And essentially, that is what it means, that we want to get to a place of an ideal system of governance where there is not much difference between laws and values. And that is essentially how we engineer laws in today's date, so that because we envision that we will go to we are going towards a state where these values are seen to be held across the civilization. So yeah, to that point and to your point, it is essentially back engineered the value system of the future into present day laws. That's exactly what you said. My earlier point about different contexts for willpower was with the essence that would it be depletion of willpower or depletion of ego, or would could it be that we have different kind of identities even though the self is the same but our identities in situations may differ?
People use the terms in different ways. I think I said in my book on the self that you have an identity before you have a self. So a
Okay.
newborn baby doesn't even
Hmm.
know that its arms and feet belong to it, that
Right.
it can control
Right.
them. But the newborn baby probably already has a name and an address and a tax number. When
Yes.
my baby was born, my parents gave it $5,000 and started a bank account, which surprised many people on the other side of the family. A baby has $5,000. But so it had an identity in the sense of a place in society, and that was continuous before it developed the inner psychological mechanisms to understand how to operate his hands and feet and to recognize where it belongs and know that it has a name, and pretty early figures out it belongs to a particular family.
Yes.
But all
Would
those
that
things,
change with context? Would that identity of self, or would you behave differently as a parent versus as a college student versus a person who's at work versus a person at home based on context? And does that have anything to do with willpower?
I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with willpower. Certainly, people behave differently in different situations. There are norms, but again, to me, this is a sign of the flexibility and adaptability of a self, not that you somehow have uh,
Identities.
different identities.
Right.
Uh,
Awesome. Okay. Do you think that planning and preparation would lead to better management of willpower? If
oh,
willpower
yes,
is
yes, no
finite
question.
resource.
They are positively correlated, and the causation goes in both directions. Some of this is my work, some of this is by some other very creative people who showed that if your willpower is down and you have clear, definite plans, it's easier to reach your goals. There's very good research on that. They're positively correlated, and it looks like causation goes in both directions. So when your willpower is down, having clear and very precise, specific plans helps you know what to do. Basically, the automatic system of the mind can take over, if it knows exactly what to do. So planning helps when willpower is low. Conversely, it takes willpower to make plans. When people
Yes.
are depleted, they don't feel like planning. One of my colleagues, Shosta, ran a study outside the IKEA store, which is a store, a furniture store, but it's very complicated and you have to build much of the things that you buy there. So somehow it's exhausting. Stop there. So he talked to people going into the store and coming out of the store, saying, how much would you feel like doing these things? One of them was making a plan for the next few weeks. And going into the store, even though they're focused on shopping, sure, that'd be interesting to do, make a plan for the next couple of weeks. Coming out of the store, whew, they're tired. No, can't do any planning. So it takes energy to do it. We also know in terms of people's trait self-control. Some people are just generally better at self-control than others. People with good self-control have much better lives in lots of ways, much more comfortable and so on. And part of that is that they do a lot more planning. I had another study published where how much planning did you do in the last week and how much planning are you going to do in the next week? And the people with good self-control said, yes, I plan. And the low self-control people were more spontaneous and unplanned, which is why their lives tend to stumble around in more unsatisfying patterns. So yes, there's a strong relationship.
See, we spoke about ego, which is the self. My point is that self preservation, cognitive dissonance, and we tend to justify our actions a lot. Why do you think that is? Where do you think the defensive mechanism kicks in and why?
There's somewhat different theories about that. You're certainly right. People do resolve cognitive dissonance and they have defensive processes to convince themselves that they're better than they think, better than perhaps other people think. Um, to me, I tend to suspect that the more basic reason is interpersonal. If you look at it in an evolutionary or biological perspective, what you think of yourself doesn't have very much impact on your life. But what other people think of you has a lot of impact on your life,
Right.
especially under the conditions in which we evolved, living in small groups of hunter gatherers. So you're very dependent on the other people. So your thought processes are how can I make these people trust me, like me, respect me, accept me, keep me in the group.
Right.
Um, so that's extremely important, and you learn to justify your actions. And if you do something bad, other people might punish you for it unless you can come up with a positive explanation. Now, we sometimes also do this privately, but I think that's probably derivative of the other process. Now, other people may disagree. There is a history of thinking that self-esteem is the supreme motive and people mainly want to think well of themselves. I just don't know why that would be. Certainly in my own research way back from even when I was in graduate school, you get the same information, say, about yourself publicly as in other people know it, or privately, it's confidential, only you will know it. And people react much more strongly to the public information. The effect on your self-esteem should be
Mm-hmm.
exactly the same. It's the same information. It tells you the same thing about yourself. But if nobody else knows about it, who cares? It might feel a little bit good or bad, but it doesn't really matter that much. Whereas if other people know about it, then it starts to have social reality. It starts to operate in your world. And if it's bad, that's a problem for you. And if it's good, that gives you an advantage and maybe some opportunities.
But I would assume that self esteem in my mind, pretty much like self confidence, my ability to do a certain thing in the short term, or my belief in my ability to do something, is like the fake it till you make it saying, which may work in the short term, as in it keeps me in a positive mindset to be able to achieve, to have the belief of achieving the task, even if in the grand scheme of things that may not be true. But in the short span of actually doing the task, it does help me with a positive mindset. Does that make sense?
Yes, there's what we call a self-fulfilling prophecy that if you believe something, it's more likely to come true. I'm watching some of the sports lately, and the announcers all talk about playing with confidence. You think positively about yourself. So it helps a little bit. It can clearly go wrong also if you sign up for an advanced mathematics class because you're very confident, but you cannot do the math.
Right.
You're setting yourself up for failure, or approaching a romantic partner who is way more out of your league, someone who would never be interested in you. Again, you're just setting yourself up for failure. There was a great resolution of this by a couple of researchers, Peter Galvitzer and Shelley Taylor, who provide some evidence that people go around most of the time positively evaluating how good they are. But when they have to make a decision, they sober up, as it were, and become very realistic and recognize their strengths and weaknesses pretty accurately so that they can make a reasonably good decision. And then they go back to holding these positive illusions or exaggerations. And they're also only limited. You tend to think of yourself at your best or a little bit better. Not that you're going to be an Olympic champion or international chess master or something like that.
Right.
So thinking of yourself at your best, again, to me, I thought the most important of the various conceptions people have themselves is the desired reputation, is how do you want other people to see you, which is
Right.
you at your best or maybe a little bit better than that. And so your
Right.
answers tend to come from that. Your thinking tends to be based on that because that's the basis for carving the niche you want in your social world.
Right. So everything, given this term of self-esteem, everything would be context dependent, and everything is arrived to a point from a larger scheme of things of how you fit in to a community, how you are perceived not by yourself in isolation by but by people who you surround yourself with. It is not, yes, it is not an isolation, but to that extent, why then we feel really bad when we're rejected by a group, and why would there be such a need to belong? I understand the point that we're social animals, and to your point that we're cultural animals more than social animals. But the need to belong and the need to not be rejected, which means that we want to be accepted in a group settings. My question is, why does it happen that way?
All right. First of all, social animals survive by being part of a group. There are
Yes.
benefits to being in the group. It's safer, for one thing. You can share some information and some resources. In human groups, we share a lot more information and a lot more resources than other animals. So belonging to the group, securing your place in there, and maintaining your membership in the group, that's fundamental for survival. It enables you a better chance to survive and, of course, to reproduce. Those are the two biological imperatives: live as long as you can and reproduce. That usually also requires a belonging to the group, attracting some others to someone to mate with you. There's another part to your question, right?
Why is it that we feel so hurt when we're rejected, and why? What is this need to belong? Yes, you've answered the need to belong.
Yeah,
Um,
okay. Rejection thwarts the need to belong, and insofar as connecting with others is a basic drive, being rejected will be a basic fear.
yes.
I came to this attending conferences, hearing some colleagues arguing that the fear of death was the basis of human motivation and anxiety,
Yes.
and I just it intuitively didn't seem right to me, and so I went out and read a lot of the literature, and we wrote a review of the scientific findings. There is some, indeed, fear of death and injury. Most anxiety is about being rejected, abandoned by the people who love you, rejected for the jobs you want or the organizations you want to be part of, and so on. And it's very fundamental. People form relationships very easily and resist breaking them, even when they've mostly outlived their usefulness. And in laboratory studies, we set up little things where people are accepted or rejected by other people. It's an interesting
Right.
existential question. Why should that bother them? This is somebody they never met before, might never see again. Why do they care whether this person rejects them or not? That's clearly not an existential threat. But some studies by my colleague Shosta showed that it's because people think this person is rejecting me now, other people might reject me in the future. It has a sort of future aspect. There might be something wrong with me that causes these people to reject me, and maybe I don't care about them. There's nothing at stake here in today's laboratory experiment. But in the future, I will need people, and if they reject me for the same reason, that could be a real problem for me.
Yes.
So it has a future element.
It has a spiraling effect, yes.
Yes.
But what happens then to a person's self-esteem or self-confidence? Let's say in a toxic relationship, if let's say if it's with your parents, or let's say if it is with somebody you love, how do you navigate that in a community setting?
I think it's clear from the evidence that being in a toxic relationship is often very hard on your self-esteem. You wonder what you're doing wrong, and why other people are happy in their relationships and you're not happy in yours. And especially if the partner in your toxic relationship is blaming you and giving you feedback that there is basically something wrong with you, that has to be profoundly disturbing.
Right.
People do stay sometimes a long time in those relationships. Obviously, with your parents, it's hard to escape them altogether, although at some point you can grow up and at least move out. Romantic relationships, too, people stay in them for an inordinately long time, even when they're not satisfying. But it's not just how satisfying the relationship is. This was some of the work by the great Carol Rusbold, who spent much of her career studying why do people stay with their romantic partners. She said there are really three things. So there's the quality of the relationship. Does it make you happy or unhappy? There are the alternatives. So maybe the relationship's not good, but if you think that's the only one you could get, you may stay in there. It's relevant in a variety of ways. If your self-esteem is down, you think maybe I won't be able to attract anyone else anyway. Some environments, so for example, if you're heterosexual and you live in a place where there are a lot more members of one gender than the other, then if you're in the majority, it's going to be hard for you to get another mate because there aren't enough to go around. So
Yes.
again, you might stay in a fairly unsatisfying relationship, whereas the person is in the minority, they can easily find someone else. So they might feel free to leave. So the quality of alternatives is the second. And the third is how much you've already invested in it. This becomes an issue in toxic or even abusive relationships. They often have a very destructive phase, and then they'll make up and resolve they're going to do better, and they're going to try to do better and try to solve that problem. And then there's another bad period, and they go back and forth. And after a couple of years of this, you think, I've come so far with this person, even though it's not perfect yet. But if I leave, if I get a divorce or run off or whatever, start over with somebody else, I might have to go through all this again. And I just don't have enough energy or whatever. That seems a discouraging prospect. They don't know if other people will be different or better. So people do tend to stay in the relationship longer than they could. I've made that mistake myself in the past.
See, if self-esteem can be inflated and ego can lie and willpower can deplete, what is left? What is the core of a person beneath all those layers?
You deplete your willpower, but then you recover it. And also, you have more than you think. Um, the mind is designed to conserve energy. Remember, we grew up under conditions where it wasn't always sure you'd have something to eat tomorrow.
Right.
And plus, the immune system needs a lot of energy sometimes if you get an infection to
Mhm.
kill you, unless your body can fight it off. So your body works to conserve energy. Your mind doesn't take an inventory of how much energy is left in the body. It doesn't really know that. It just operates that, well, I've been using a lot, so I shouldn't use any more. It notices when your muscles, you're starting to use them. So it sends you a signal that your muscles are tired. This is not something in the muscle. This is something the brain
In the mind.
does as a
Yeah.
signal to
Mhm.
conserve energy. Now, there is a point at which your muscle just won't work anymore.
Yeah.
But long before that, you feel tired. And in lab studies, they'll bring people in, like the exercise researchers, they'll have the person come in and perform some kind of physical exercise, maybe lifting weights, pressing a bar or something like that, until they get tired. And so they've been doing it for a while and they're definitely tired. And then they'll say, we'll give you a reward, maybe $10 or something, if you can press as hard as you did when you first came in. And they can't. The
Mm-hmm.
muscle is still capable of doing that. And the
Right.
willpower thing seems to be like that too. Now, like the muscle, there is a point at which you just can't, it just won't work anymore. And and I don't know if there's that point in terms of willpower or not. Presumably there is, but in our lab studies, we're never able to get people to that
So
extreme state.
you're
Yeah.
saying that it is the body is looking after and thinking about survival all the time, as you
It's not
said.
necessarily thinking about it. It's just designed to do things to conserve energy, to
Right.
do things that will help survival. Yes, of course, survival is one of the most basic criteria. Nature has not been able to make any life that will last forever. And so the
Right.
only way life continues is if it survives and reproduces. So
Right.
those
That's
doing
the
things that are
first.
good for those.
Right. That's the first step of Maslow's pyramid as well. Survival and reproduction. And then everything starts from there. Yeah, I would say that would be a good point. We spoke about cultural context a lot and evolution and communication and the process of communication. My point is that why isn't there a universal language of communication between species and between things living and non-living? And should there be one?
That's a lovely question, and it's fun to think about. Obviously, there's not even a universal human language. So,
Yeah.
language is a very advanced, uh, in terms of biology, it's a very advanced capability. It's one of the essential things about being human. All known human societies have language, even though anthropologists are always looking for exceptions. They've never found a human society that doesn't have language. In contrast, no animals have language. They communicate a bit with squawks and barks and things like that, but nothing that a linguist would call that's a genuine language. So
Right.
it's difficult to correct them, to create a language. It took a long time to have the brain power able to do it. And we also see that language does not get embedded in the brain. There's something about the way language works as a vocal representation of meaningful thought that cannot be encoded into the brain. It'd be nicer if we were all born knowing the same language, all humans knowing the same language, then we could communicate with people easily all over the world.
Right.
But instead, languages were invented separately in all the different places that people were, and they evolved over time to different dialects and variations. So, and the human brain is really designed for language in a sense. They're now finally getting these translating machines, which I've been
Yes.
reading. They've been promising it right around the corner since the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
I still don't think they work quite the way human brains actually process language. I don't know that the computer really understands. It's just you give it so much information so it knows how to translate uh,
Right.
every everything. But I always said, even when they get one that's perfect, it's still not close to what a human being can do, because you can take a baby and pluck it down any society in the world, and it will learn that language
Yes.
just by hearing and seeing and interacting with other people now. And then you have a computer that can do that, then I'll be impressed.
Right. But
So
Neil deGrasse Tyson on his podcast, which is I think Space Talks, he once came in and said that maths is the language of the universe. That's like the universal language. Now, what do you think? Maths, is it a naturally occurring phenomenon or is it a cultural phenomenon? Was it invented or did it just exist?
most mathematicians, I believe, regard their work as discovery more than invention. Certainly, I think 3 times 9 equals 27. That's just true. It's true in every culture that does math gets the same answer. We learn it from our culture. We memorize 3 times 9 is 27. But it's objectively true. and every culture gets the same answer. There's no cultural variation. And I'm pretty sure if someday we master space travel and can send our people to the far edges of the galaxy and they meet intelligent people over there, they also will say 3 times 9 equals 27. So
Yes.
that's a fundamental truth that we learned to discover and master and use. Yes, we do learn it from our culture, but it was originally discovered. It wasn't something that was invented. It's not somebody could have invented that 3 times 9 equals 15. So it has to be that way, and all the numbers. And this is a idea I've thought about a lot. And when I was in college, I was impressed by the Sapir theory that language determines thought, and different languages cause people to think differently, and they're so different that you couldn't really understand the experience of a person who grew up speaking a different language. And yet, I think now that's one of the wrongest ideas in all of social science, because almost every thought can be expressed in almost every language.
Yes.
There isn't always a word for every thing, although there's a term, a linguistic lacuna, for when a language doesn't have a word for a particular concept. Like
Right.
in English, we talk about Schadenfreude, the pleasure at having seen somebody else's problems. So we don't have an English term for it, the Germans do, but
Yes.
we all know what it means. And when it's explained, people are able to understand it right away. What that means is that even there's one universe of concepts, and all languages basically just use different sounds and symbols to express those same concepts. It's tied to reality. It goes also, I remember reading an observation by an anthropologist. Again, anthropology is a field really looking for each culture is different and unique features about it, and so on. And yet, say at a conference late at night after they've had several beers, the anthropologists will often admit that everyday conversation is pretty much the same everywhere. People talk about, is it going to rain, or I'm hungry, or my child is sick, or let's go have sex, or gotta worry about this or that. A lot of the basic things are the same everywhere. And again, we do have new concepts like an astronaut. There was no such concept 10 centuries ago, because the idea that people could leave the planet and travel into space seemed ridiculous. So new things become possible, and yet, in a sense, the possibility of that idea had to, in some ways, always be there. And again, once astronauts exist, there may be a new term to refer to them in every different language, but they all
Right.
refer to the same thing.
So maths is discovered. It is not. It is a naturally occurring thing that is resonant across cultures,
Yes.
across
Now, I
reality.
don't know what, I didn't see that episode by Neil, but he may have been saying that there's something about mathematics that describes, that can express the motion of the planets. Saying the
Yes,
planets don't have language, and they don't calculate the math themselves.
that's correct.
And
Yes.
yet, if you understand enough about the physics of them, you can predict where they will be at any particular time in space relative to the sun and the other planets. And so, in a sense, the physical items follow mathematical laws, or follow causal laws that can be expressed mathematically. So he might have been meaning that, or he might have been meaning that's a common feature that is more easily translated in different languages than some other things. Here in the United States, we have a lot of foreign students, and many of them go into the mathematics type fields.
Yeah.
And American students sometimes have the stereotype that Asians like yourself must be really good at math. But as some of them say, we came here as immigrants, and the language is difficult, but the math is the same
That's a
as
good
what we
point.
had in school.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, it's also a more universal language. And so
Yeah.
they can do math more easily than they can, say, study English literature, where you need to know all the subtleties of meaning and all that. That's harder for a person learning a new language. But 3 times 9 equals 27. You can express that in every language, and it's always true.
Yes. See, the idea of self and meaning and self regulation and willpower, all these concepts of the mind also give the idea of what is driving these thoughts, what is driving survival, what is consciousness, what is free will, does it truly exist, the fact of or the idea that you are in control of these things. And I had a recent podcast with this person, brilliant guy, Mr. Matt Johnson, and he came out with the idea that he does not, like, quote unquote, like, does not believe in free will, with the idea that you don't know what you don't know, and the concept of free will lies beyond your conscious understanding of how the universe works. And the talk went on and to progress. It was actually derived from a conversation about creating serendipitous moments and being surprised by magical cues that you may resonate with. But what do you think? What are your ideas on free will? Is it worth pursuing? Does
Oh,
it
yes.
fall? Does it come underneath self, or what do you think about it?
Yeah, I published a book just last year, The Science of Free Will. So, first of all, we need to understand different scientists have different ideas of what free will is. I start by saying I've talked to scientists who believe in free will and others who don't. And I
Mm-hmm.
agree with both of them because they're not talking about the same thing. The ones
Right.
who say there's no such thing usually believe it's some kind of exemption from causality, or you have an immaterial soul that causes your behavior and
Mm-hmm.
bypasses your brain. And I don't believe in any of that stuff. But in the more basic scientific sense of being able to act differently in the same situation, that is a crucial part of the human psyche. It is an exceptional power that we have, much more advanced than in other animals, and is fundamental to so much that goes on in our society, including morality and laws. In a sense, it's very hard to talk about morality without believing in at least some degree of free will. Moral judgments, when you say, oh, the person did something bad there, you're saying the person should have acted differently in that situation. The person
Right.
should not have done that. And that presupposes that the person could have done something different. In
Right.
fact, if it was impossible to act differently, we don't really blame the person morally for what they did. But if they could have acted differently, which is assumed, and that's the basic definition of free will, again, fundamental to our morals, fundamental to our legal system, fundamental to how we look and operate our lives. Human evolution produced a number of advances to enable us to do this much better than even our closest animal relatives. We're better able to project, say, into the future and think about the downstream consequences of our actions. That
Right.
certainly makes you freer than if you can't imagine the effects of your actions beyond the next minute or two. It enables you to, say, delay gratification or to invest for the future or to make plans, to do things, all that we do much more than other animals, again, suggesting a much greater degree of free will. It is also evidence that we're able to conceptualize multiple alternatives, even faced with a choice in the present. We're able to realize, okay, this or that could happen. Maybe I should prepare for both of those, which seems to be beyond the capability of most other animals. So I think the scientific evidence for free will in a more reasonable sense is very strong and hard to dispute.
So it does exist, is what you're saying
Yes,
in
yes.
context.
Again, it depends what definition you use, but there's certainly very important and viable definitions of free will that are a key part of the human mind.
What do you think is the difference between self-control and self-regulation?
I mostly use the terms interchangeably as if they're the same thing. Some people use self regulation as the broader term for anything that even the body does to regulate itself. So if you make a distinction, self control is something you do with conscious intention, whereas self regulation might include see how your body maintains a constant temperature. Obviously, you're not aware of your body temperature, and if
Yes.
you may be aware that you're hot, but you don't consciously cool it off. But so that might count as self-regulation in a broader sense. But in my work, I'm thinking the two are essentially the same.
But body controlling your temperature, or say doing it without your awareness, would mean a more conscious versus subconscious working, which is technically not in your control of regulation of or controlling willpower or
But the body is regulating its temperature.
it.
It gets hot, it cools off. If it gets cold, it shivers, which creates kinetic energy and warms it up a little bit. The body makes a fever to fight a germ. Again, you're not
Yes.
conscious of any of that happening. You're conscious maybe that you have a fever, but the
Yes.
process of generating the fever. So all those can be counted as self-regulation, and that this is something the body is doing to manage its inner states and systems. So that counts, but that's mostly outside of social psychology. I recognize their point, but
Mhm.
in the phenomena I work with, self-control and self-regulation are basically the same.
See, we have spoken a lot about worth, self-esteem, ego in a social context. If somebody is adrift or somebody has a depleted sense of self, what do you think you would tell them? Not advice, not like a fix, but something to think about when things are bad and you don't see progress.
So you want to tell them something, but not to try to fix the problem.
More, how do you, because a quick fix or an easy fix is temporary, but getting into situations where you have a depleted sense of self will keep reoccurring based on situations and based on context. With that said, is there something to think about when that happens that could be the same across context, which would make me feel better about myself when I have a depleted sense of self?
Okay, you're using depleted in a different way than I use. I generally talk about in terms of depleted willpower. But if there's something about I think you're talking about self-esteem
Yes,
and
self-esteem. Yes, if I'm
so
feeling low, like I get that you say depleted in terms of willpower and ego. What I'm saying is that in situations where you don't feel too confident about yourself, the underlying core of a person, how do you make them feel more confident? And it could be resonating across contexts in that sense.
I'm not sure if it's maybe more common sense than psychology, but what people do is compare yourself to others who are worse off. If you're feeling bad because something bad happened, you say it could have been worse. It's often the first thing people say. You crashed your car, at least nobody was hurt.
Gratitude, you could come into gratitude, and
Yes.
that could, yes.
And so there are always levels that are worse. And people know this too. People compare themselves to make themselves feel better, compared to people who are worse off rather than people who are better off.
Right.
And people say encouraging things to each other. And oh, you failed, but try again. You'll succeed the next time. This is very basic stuff.
Right. If you were to rewrite your book of the meaning of life in a post-COVID, post-AI world, where in an era of loneliness and maybe shallow connections, what would change?
Oh, I've been wondering to whether I should write another book on meaning of life. My first one did very well, but it's now what, 30 years old, 35.
Yes.
Um, I was just going to possibly do a new one just because there's more research now, and plus I was young and foolish then. Now I'm old and foolish, so I might have different perspectives for life lessons. And at any time, there are always issues and problems. Living in the modern world is very nice and comfortable compared to most other places you could have been born in the history of the world. So things are good, but yes, there are problems. Connecting to others oddly seems to be more difficult, even though we have more communication technology and more ways of meeting people than ever before. Reading a
Yes.
number of reports that in the United States, many young people don't even have a romantic relationship in their teenage years. None at all, in other words.
Yes.
And many people are single, fewer people are getting married, fewer people are having children. We wonder why this is, and some people are looking at the technology that's supposed to connect us, and maybe it's somehow dividing us and making things worse. The decline of religion is another factor. Religion critics of religion say it certainly done harm, caused wars of religion, and things like that. And that's true, but it's done much more good than
Yes.
harm in the history of the world. And it brings people together and gives them a context of meaning, enables them to connect each other, and gives them a reason to behave in a morally good fashion. The loss of that is costly. I've been reflecting recently on the loss of common experiences because the way the entertainment options have multiplied. And
Yes.
I just know the United States and Western Europe. I don't know if the rest of the world is how fast it's coming along as well. But we don't all watch the same things at the same time.
Yes.
I remember reading a book called Coming Apart by Charles Murray, and he
Mm-hmm.
started in the United States the day before Kennedy was assassinated. And he said 30% of American television sets were all watching the same show. It's called the Beverly Hillbillies. It was a comedy. But we all shared that. And then the next day at the office or at school or wherever, oh, did you see that show? And it gives you something to talk about. Whereas
Right.
now people see different things at different times. And even if you're at a party and someone says, oh, did you see that show? And someone else will say, oh, don't talk about it because I want to see, I haven't seen it yet. It was the same with the movies. The movies used to come to town and play for a week at the local theater. And there was no other way to see them except maybe you would see them on television a year later if you caught it. Again, only there was no way to tape it or store it. And so everybody in town went to see, everybody who cared went to see the movies. And again, it was a common experience to talk about. We still have sports,
Yes.
which we can talk about, and politics, but politics makes people mad. And sports, there's the argument that people are starting to put their religious passions into politics. And so thinking
Um,
the other side is evil,
yeah.
as opposed to you used to hope when the other party was in power that at least they would do a good job and take care of the country. And now you are hoping that they will fail, which is very destructive sentiment. In terms of relationships, your options for, say, finding a marriage partner were much more limited in the past. And so you had to act fast and really make the best of it and try to make it work. But you hear now a lot of young people saying with these online dating apps, there are hundreds and hundreds of people I could go out with. And so if I pick one and I go, well, it's all right for a while, but then there's something I'm not satisfied with. Maybe I'll go find someone better. And
Yes.
there's less incentive to work hard at it and work through the problems and make it work. And why people end up just having none at all, I don't know. I think maybe those match computer dating services don't bring you together as effectively. You're just reading someone's profile online. I mean, most of the relationships in my life were people I had known, young women who I had known for a while before there was any kind of romance. And we got to know each other. And so we already had a sense that we were the same type of person. We could get along. If you just read someone's description on a dating site profile, that may
Right.
sound good, but you don't know. And by the time you get to know the person, well, oh, it's okay. We're really not suited for each other. I don't really have an answer. That seems to be the main way that it's happening now. Of course, there were cultures that had arranged marriages, and then you really just had to make it work. And you weren't tempted by thinking, oh, I should just go back online and find somebody else.
Yes. India has a big concept around arranged marriages, and a lot of people get down to a lot of family-based decisions as well on who you should get married to, and a lot of factors that assign it.
And they work about as well as the others, right?
Yes,
And,
they do.
I was
And
reading Roland Fryer, the economist, saying, an economist who believe having choice is the best thing. But he said someone just showed him the data, the marital satisfaction and divorce rates and everything. And it's really not that different from the arranged marriage. You think arranged marriages are just get somebody at random, but it's not like that.
yes,
Your
it's not
parents
even.
pick somebody who they think is good for you. And from what I've read, I don't know about India, but in Europe, when they arranged marriages, the young person usually could have a veto power. I could say,
Oh,
absolutely not. I don't like that person at all. I won't do it. And then it usually didn't happen. You couldn't do that over and over, obviously, but at least you had some say if it was a terrible match.
right.
And again, they're usually trying to pick someone who'd be good for you.
Yeah, you have spent all your life studying and writing books and contributing to the scientific community around the human mind. Is there something that haunts you? Or is there something that no study has answered yet with relation to the mind?
Oh, I don't think of one off the top of my head, but there are many unanswered questions and things I would like to understand better. So psychology is not going to run out of interesting questions anytime
For
soon.
sure, yes.
But I don't have a particular single one that I'm stuck on.
You have written a lot about meaning and purpose and self, and how should we get and define meaning in our lives. And this is like a standard question that I ask everybody that comes on, is that what is it that you think is the purpose of life, and what is it that the purpose is of your life?
Okay. At the biological level, the purpose of life is to sustain life. As they all say, we didn't ask to be born, but we are thrown into life, and our life is designed to try to survive and reproduce because the possibility of death is always there.
Yes,
That's a failure, and any life that was content to just die usually did die.
yes,
At the biological level, it's sustaining life. Now, at a cultural level, there are many different purposes that people can put themselves to. A lot of them come down to serving society in some way, functioning well in society, being successful in it. You usually gain status, resources in society by doing something that benefits society. Even, say, corporations, why do they exist? They make money by providing goods and services that other people will be glad to pay for, that other people want to have. So making society better in some way, it might be a soldier who's fighting hard to defend his country against an invasion, or it might be someone who works in a medical setting to help people recover from sickness and live longer. It might be scientists or artists who try to create some work that will have a lasting impact and value to society. But doing the things that society values, and society mostly values things that help the group to flourish, that help its population sustain and increase, and its economy function, and its power work effectively. So for me, I've set myself the goal of trying to understand the human condition as well as I can. Because of my unusual career, I'm something of a generalist, and I've worked in many different areas and many topics in psychology, read lots of
yes.
other people's research on many topics. So, an unusually advantageous position to try to put it all together in the big picture. And so, that's my main goal, to try to get as close to the truth as I can before I die.
That is super cool. Thank you so much, Professor, for taking out the time. This was an awesome conversation.
Thanks for the good interview, and it's been a pleasure.
Right. Thank you so much again for your time,
Okay.
Professor.
Okay.
Thank you so much for tuning in, you guys. If you like this, then you can hit the like button. The algorithm likes it, gives me more views, and maybe I can contemplate on keeping this channel for free for you to see. If you hit the subscribe button, the algorithm likes that as well. But unlike the like button, this is more useful because you'd be actually notified by every time we do drop a video on this channel. If you have any complaints regarding the content that we drop or the questions that we ask, or you want to give us any suggestions with questions or people that you want us to interview, we have added a feedback form in the description. You are very welcome to fill that up and let me know. If you hated this content and you do not want to see my face ever again, and do not want to share it with anybody, and do not want to refer this kind of content with anyone, then until you do tune in to my next episode or my last episode, or you do tune in, I would like to wish you in Truman Burbank's very own words, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Cheers.